Now that we've practiced a bunch of different colored pencil techniques, we're going to begin to look at how to color match and apply those colors into a drawing. We're going to be working one section at a time, so I'm going to start with the pumpkin. So this is a macro or up-close picture of a pumpkin, and we're going to work on finding colors that are going to match that we can use for light tones, medium tones, and shadows throughout the pumpkin. And then we're going to go to the application, fill that in, and come back to this worksheet to fill in and find the colors for the grapes next. So after we color match, here is how we're going to be applying those colors that we pick out onto this macro picture of the pumpkin here, so you can see where all those different shades are found in different places. So the first thing that we need to do on the worksheet is look for colors that are similar to what we're working with. So this is going to be a lot of oranges, yellows, and red tones. So I'm not really working in any specific order. I'm just pulling out one of the colors, holding it up to the picture to see if there's anywhere that this could be found. So this is more of a light tone because it matches in some of the highlighted areas. So I'm going to swatch it out onto the potential colors list. Some of these I might use, some of them I might not use depending on how they look. And I'm going to go ahead and label them. So some colored pencils have numbers and letters like these that I'm working with. And then some have names. So just make sure you label it so you can go back and find that specific color later as you're working on the application. So like I said, there's going to be a lot of orange tones and red tones throughout. Look for those darker values, so some dark reds, dark oranges, and just try to somewhat match the order of the values. So the lightest yellows are going to be up at the top. Look for medium tones, so some in-between areas that are just like a regular medium toned orange. And then the darker values, so those are going to be a little bit more desaturated. So the more vibrant a color is, the lighter the value will most likely be. So here are all the colors that I'm working with. And I'm going to create a gradient here going from my lightest values into my darkest tones so that as I get to my final application, I can see which values are going to blend well into each other, how to create this value change and gradient on my final piece, and then seeing which colors maybe aren't going to work. So I'm taking out some of the colors that I feel like didn't completely match my reference picture and only adding in the ones that truly match after I swatch them out. Now you can see this starting to get a little bit darker. However, some of the colors are still a little bit vibrant, so I'm going to need to add in complementary colors. So a lot of these darker values are red. So I'm bringing in a green shading on top of those red tones just to desaturate and darken the values in some of those darker areas. Looking at the reference picture, a lot of those values too, even in the medium tones, are desaturated. So that means they're not a bright hue. So bringing in some of the blue into the orange areas will desaturate that orange, make it just slightly darker and not as bright. And then in areas that are yellow, I'm going to bring in the purple, which is the complementary color, in order to desaturate that as well. So now that I have color matched and found which colors are going to work the best, I'm going to start applying it to the next step here, which is this outlined reference picture of the pumpkin. Before I add color, and I actually forgot to do this when that yellow was added, I'm going to be working with white. So this white is going to be where all of the lightest highlights are at. I'm shading those in. The trickiest part here is just remembering what you've already added with the white. So try to work maybe from left to right or top to bottom, just so you can ensure that you're covering all of those highlights with the white. At this point, after you have the white filled in, you don't really have to worry too much about leaving it the white of the paper. You can just lightly shade over top. And then when we bring back the blending material, which I'm going to be using olive oil eventually, it will get rid of the color off of that highlight, leaving that area completely white, which is a great way to work with these light highlighted water droplets so that we don't have to worry about working around them, because that is a lot of detail. So as I'm working here, you'll notice that I'm starting very lightly. So I started with a light coat of yellow over pretty much the entire area, leaving the darkest tones alone so I can bring in a darker color. But really you could fill everything with your lightest value first. So work from light to dark. And then I brought in a coat of orange on top, which was more of the medium toned orange. So I'm leaving some of those lightest spots as just the yellow for now. And then I can slowly build and work those values back in. Now I'm starting to work with one of my darker tones. So this is a dark red color that I'm working in to the darkest value, which is that large section that runs from the top to the bottom on the left side. I filled all of that in, and then the far left of the pumpkin as well is one of the darkest values. And then you'll notice around each water droplet, there's kind of a darker outline, which is shaded in as well. So I'm using the red, and then eventually I'll go over top of that with green to desaturate and darken it. But for now, I'm just working in light layers. So I'm using this red to cover the majority of the picture because there is a lot of red mixed in with the orange tones throughout. And like I said before, I'm just going to lightly coat everything right now and then slowly build and burnish the values. I added some green into the darkest areas because that has my red tones. The green is the complementary color to red, so that's going to desaturate and darken my value. So I'm going into those darkest areas with one of my other darker values, going around the water droplets with green. And really, you only have to do this once or twice. I would go around each water droplet maybe once you're towards the end if you'd rather do that as your last step than along the way. But I would go around them once with red, once with green, and then maybe just a top coat of red one more time. In order to really darken those values around the outside of the water droplets. But you really don't have to do too much with them. There is a slight value change throughout most of them, but I would focus the detail to the largest ones for now and look at how the color changes in each of them. For example, that largest water droplet that's pretty much in the center of the picture has a slight yellow hue in the bottom left-hand corner that fades into a darker orange and then into a red and has that lightest highlight in the middle. So try your best to really squint your eyes, look at highlights, look at shadows, and try to layer those colors throughout. Right now I'm going back over top of things with the red just to continue to darken. And as I'm working, I'm slowly putting more pressure with my colored pencil in order to start burnishing the color, which means mixing and blending it together. Eventually I'll use that olive oil as a top layer to really blend and fade everything completely together so I don't have the white of the paper coming through in the background. But for now, I'm just working on slowly adding more and more pressure as I'm going. So I outlined those water droplets again, going over them with the green, and I'm just working on filling in this green anywhere that looks really dark. So I'm shading kind of right over top of those water droplets, all of those small ones, not worrying too much about details within them until the last step, because for now they all have this orangish red hue. And then once I erase and get rid of or use the olive oil on top, this will erase out some of that color. So then I could go back over top of it and pay more attention to each individual water droplet. So I'm using that olive oil now to really blend everything together with the Q-tip. I'm using small circles to really fade and blend those colors. And then I'll do a coat on top after this. Using the colored pencils on top of your blending agent typically works well and keeps things blended while adding another additional detailed layer. So you really want to focus on detail as one of those last steps. So I'm really taking my time blending this out. I'm not using too much olive oil, but I am making sure that all of those white areas come through. And then, like I said, I'm going to focus on detail with this last layer, really making sure to fade my dark values into my medium tones, leave those areas that are lighter. So really look at where is it darkest. Again, if you squint your eyes, you can see those outside corners are the darkest, and then there's that long strip down the middle to left side that's very dark. And then there's just some of those darker details throughout around the water droplets. And really focus on layering. Make sure you have the dark green, dark red mixed together. And you can even bring in a little bit of blue into those orange areas where you didn't add red in order to desaturate and dull that orange or that bright, vivid orange color. So taking your time, really layer colors, use a blending agent. You can do burnishing, use a white colored pencil to mix. But I find with these water droplets, it's a really simple way to use those highlights with the white colored pencil first in order to make sure that that does stay the white of the paper as you're working. These last couple steps, I'm just making sure to mix and blend, fade my colors together, and focus on the details of each individual droplet, making sure that I have those lightest highlights. I even shaded over top of some of the lighter areas of the highlight in order to dull them slightly, since there's only a few areas that are completely white on the reference picture. But look at your reference picture, go back and forth. Sometimes it helps to flip both upside down to give you a new perspective on the color and what you're filling in. But really take your time and layer those values together.